Savvy Business Radio, drawing out the best from our guests with our host, Christina Nichman.
Our guest today is Sara Brito, co-founder of the Good Food Media Network, a 501c3 nonprofit that produces and publishes Good Food 100 restaurants. Their mission is to bring food consciousness to the public so you can choose healthy and smart. Find out more about Good Food Media Network and their economic report at goodfood100restaurants.org. Hi, Sara. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. How are you this afternoon?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you betcha. We're in the holiday season right now. We're getting ready to have Christmas this coming week and then New Year's. And you have started a wonderful annual Good Food 100 restaurant list and economic report where you really help people get a touch of what wonderful cuisines are out there, restaurants, and economically, you know, what the price value are and where you can find the best eateries around the country. And it's fabulous. And share with our audience a little bit about what brought you into the food industry in particular, and then starting this list.
Well, I think a couple of things brought me to come up with this idea to create the Good Food 100 Restaurants list. One of them was a belief that the way food was being covered in the media and in the traditional rating systems that exist out there tended to focus only on taste, service, and ambiance. Really what was only happening in the front of the house or what was happening on the plate or around the table. And to me, taste is only the beginning of the whole story of food. And I felt like there was this whole other aspect to the story of food that was being ignored. And that taste was really should just, I guess, really open people's palates and appetites, to use two puns, to wanting to learn more about the whole story behind their food. Everything from how it got to their table, where did those ingredients come from, who's growing this food, how were the plants and animals treated, and what were the environmental impacts of that food. And so I wanted to create a rating system that took a more holistic approach to how we view and value restaurants to hopefully ultimately change the systems. The other part that I'll just mention too is that I felt that there were so many chefs and restaurants that I had been working with across the country that were addressing the whole story of food and have been for a very long time, but they weren't really getting their fair share of the media attention. And so I wanted to provide a list that would shine the spotlight on the chefs and restaurants that were truly putting their money where their mouth is when it came to talking about supporting good food, because we know that eaters want to consume their values. And so I wanted to give eaters an easy way to find out who are the chefs and restaurants that share similar values.
And, you know, it's true. I think more than ever, consumers, not just in food, want to be more educated consumers. They want to know, where is this product coming from? You know, did it come from a third world country where that person got paid nothing and I'm, you know, whatever, you know, because that is where we, as if you have a value system that, hey, I don't believe in that, you don't shop there, you don't eat there. You decide that, okay, you know, also as far as health goes, when you know where your food comes from, it also helps your health if you know that the food is quality food and that the animals are not being harmed. Now, it's been a lot of talk in the news about, you know, different things coming out in food, E. coli and lettuce and stuff like that. And I had heard one report say, I was watching a documentary, that now the food in your grocery store comes from around the world. Like tomatoes can be shipped in from Mexico and Europe and here and there, that, you know, foods are coming from so many different sources. I'm thinking it's really hard for restaurateurs to really keep on track on where their food's coming from. Is it, or is it not?
It is. So I think that one of the challenges that faces our food system, which includes the challenges facing chefs and restaurants, is the lack of transparency in our food system. And so by creating a list that requires restaurants to dig into and do research into where the food they're buying is coming from, it helps illuminate the lack of transparency in certain parts of our system. And so, there's a big saying that, you can't change things unless you know where you are today.
Yeah.
How do we know where we want to get to if we don't know where we are today? And so I think the first step in changing our food system is to actually really know where we're at today. And so by doing something like this, we are also challenging and trying to bring increased transparency into an industry that has historically been based on secrecy.
That's interesting to me. Why is that so? That it was based on secrecy. Why would there be a lot of non-transparency in that particular industry? I
think if you think about sort of fine dining chefs, the sort of chefs of the past that were kind of seen as sort of the elite top of the field. If you were to go into a fine dining restaurant, probably a French restaurant in the past, and say, wow, this is delicious. What's in this? Or where did you get this from, these tomatoes or this spice? And, the chef might give you a little knowing wink and say, well, it's my secret. It's my secret sauce, or it's, my secret ingredient that only I know where it came from. And so I think that notion that, fine foods, good foods of the past were often foods that were scarce, hard to find, hard to access, hard to import. And so that notion of secrecy, even to our own grandparents' recipes, might be like, why doesn't my tomato sauce taste quite like my grandmother's? And then my grandmother, might say, well, I left out one little secret thing that I do to it. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that it's always, malintent form of secrecy, but I think we have to acknowledge that it is part of the DNA of the industry.
Well, it kind of makes sense now that I'm thinking about it, Sarah. Like we hear about McDonald's secret ingredients in their thing. If they were to share with everyone, there'd be a bunch of fake McDonald's out there trying to copy. We got the secret recipe. Now we can do our own McDonald's. So yeah, I get it. If you have a secret recipe and everyone just loves it, if you handed out the recipe, now maybe you wouldn't be all that special anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And I think another one that comes to mind when you think of the big food companies that have dominated our culture, the Coca-Cola recipe is another one. I think there's, media reports about how that recipe is like locked in a safe somewhere and that, you can't exactly have the Coca-Cola recipe.
Absolutely. Now, how does a restaurant that's maybe not really paid attention to where their food's coming from get more conscious and get involved in figuring out where their food's coming from? How do they even get started with all that?
Well, I think the first step is to start to fill out an application like ours, because you might not have even been considering some of the questions that we ask. And then what we say to people is the first step is not everyone is buying direct from farmers or from food producers. They're often buying from distributors. And so one of the first steps is to call your distributor and ask for a summary of all of your purchases from the prior year and to ask the distributor to tell you where they came from. And it's amazing how some chefs and restaurants get an answer back from the distributor that's like, well, we can't give you that information.
Whoa,
and
really?
So right then and there, chefs and restaurants are realizing like, wow, my distributors don't necessarily even know where the food that they're selling me is coming from, or I'm asking them questions that they're not willing to be transparent about because maybe they're worried I'm going to go try to buy from that farmer directly. So it's amazing how just simply asking a simple question, if eaters continue to ask restaurants, where is this coming from? That forces restaurants to ask their distributors and producers, my guests, my consumers want to know where their food is coming from, so I need to ask you these questions. And the question gets forced back through the supply chain. So that's why I think it's so important that eaters have to continue to demand, to ask where their food is coming from. And the most recent numbers I've seen is that something like 90% or more of consumers in a recent survey by the James Beard Foundation say that they believe it is their right, their legal right, to know where their food is coming from. Because as you mentioned, when you've got food scares, most recently the romaine lettuce scare, but we can basically probably name at least one food scare a year. Consumers deserve to know what's in their food supply.
Yeah. And as in the old days, most of us had to be farmers of some sort and grow on our own land because we didn't have grocery stores. And so we knew where our food was coming from, and it wasn't played with, there weren't chemicals in it because we were growing our own food. Now that we all go to grocery stores or restaurants, we don't know where the food's coming from. Often I will even go into a place and get something that says organic or whatever, and it won't really taste all that special. And then there's other times where I'll get something that'll say organic, free range, and it'll have it'll be more, I don't know the word, Sarah, but it's you can tell the difference. The meat's better, the product's better, it's more flavorful. And I want the better product. If I'm going to go out there and spend the extra money, I want to know that the product I'm getting is the better quality food.
Yes, absolutely. And there's all sorts of cases. I think just in the past week or two, I read another news article about an investigative report in New York City that was looking at salmon. All these different salmon were being advertised as wild salmon, and they did the test on them and determined that they were, in fact, farmed salmon. And so, I'm not here to tell you that, one is better than the other, but I believe that if you're going to label something, it should be what you're telling people that it is.
Yeah.
Another thing that, I think is interesting is that when we hear about things like child labor issues with sneakers, several years ago, forced labor, or I've read things about, Asian children making rugs and the tedious hard work it is to make rugs. As Americans, we often throw our arms up and are disgusted by these labor practices in other countries. And yet how many Americans are unconsciously, whether knowingly, unconsciously, or through acts of denial, contributing to animal abuse by continuing to spend money on meat that they know was raised in the industrial factory food system, simply because they're in some sort of fast casual restaurant establishment, and the person behind the cash register says, "Would you like to add a protein to that salad?" which seems to be the phrase that everybody is saying these days in our obsession with protein. And so you knowingly say, "Yes, please add a protein. I'll take the chicken breast."
Yeah.
Well, if you're not stopping and asking where that chicken breast is coming from, you could unknowingly, through the spending of your hard-earned money, be contributing things that you wouldn't knowingly contribute if you saw it, on your street or in your neighborhood. So I think we have to become more just conscious of how what we spend our money on a daily basis is what we are voting for. Voting is not something that just happens, in November every 4 years. I always say that if I want to know what your beliefs and values are, show me everything you spent money on in the past week, and I'll know what your beliefs and values are in a much more accurate way than, asking you what your beliefs and values are.
Wow, that is so true. I remember hearing it was a coach many years ago mentioned that I can tell what's most important to you by looking at your bank statement, because it'll show where you put your money and hence what's important to you. Are you spending it on, going out to movies and buying crap, or are you spending it on books and learning or whatever it might be? It gives you an indication what is important to you in your life. And you made such a good point, Sarah, about how as consumers we have so much power, but we take it for granted. And the one thing I get, even myself, you go out there, oh, there's that cheap deal. Well, how did that cheap deal come about, whether it be food or anything else? Often cheap means that it had to get to you not always by the best methods. as you said, maybe it's childhood labor, or maybe it's, treating an animal really poorly, through the industrial meat industry where they just process you like horribly. There's got to be a reason that it's really cheap. So now, just a couple of weeks ago, I remember I went and bought some chicken, and normally I'm getting free range, organic, and I started cooking for my dog because I've been told by the vet that the dog food has even worse standards than human food. So I started cooking for my dog, and I saw this meat on the side that was really family portion chicken breast, huge. I was like, well, I don't want to spend that much money. I'll get the non-organic stuff for my dog. And then I cooked it, and I said, oh, there's so much of it, we'll all share in it. Do you know we all got sick?
Wow.
Yeah. Was that really worth it? No, that $7 for a huge amount of chicken was so not worth it. I'd rather spend double that or more for something I know that is medicine for my body and for my dog.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what we have a saying at the Good Food 100 that good food has to be good for every link in the food chain. And it's we're not striving for perfection. But if you think about that as a philosophy, it's a holistic philosophy that says, all right, if this thing that I'm eating, was it okay for the environment? Was it okay for the animals? Was it okay for the farmers? Was it good for the distributor? Is the grocery store or establishment restaurant I'm eating it at, are those workers being fairly? And if you can check the box and say it was good, or at least not hurting any one of those links in the food chain, then we say it's good. But we believe we have to move beyond this cultural conversation around food that is only emphasizing taste. And, I think it's perpetuated, by our cultural infatuation with, food TV and the food competitions. That's all about, that moment where the judge or someone puts the fork in their mouth and says, yum, that tastes good. We've got to move beyond that. That's just the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah, because what tastes really good? The crap that they put in food too. All the, processed stuff. I mean, for years, I was totally into a lot of the processed bag stuff and McDonald's, preservatives that they put in stuff. Those preservatives and crap that they put in the food taste awesome. Doesn't mean it's good for you or the environment or the people who are working behind making it.
Yes, and I think that, chefs have a responsibility at this point. I like to sometimes say that chefs in their white chef jackets are the last pillars of society that are still standing. We no longer trust our politicians. We don't trust our religious leaders in our community. So if you think about a community or your neighborhood, and you think about who are the people that are looked up to in our neighborhood. Yeah. Chefs are among the last ones standing. And so like anyone who has been put into a position of power or influence, I believe that they have a responsibility then back to the communities that they serve, to serve those communities well. And that, we too as eaters have a responsibility that if you want restaurants and chefs that are doing the right thing in your neighborhood, in your communities, then you have to be willing to spend the money there. We were talking before we went on the air about being, New Yorkers, and, how many neighborhood institutions have closed in recent years that we've, read about in the media, and we all get disappointed. Oh, I can't believe that neighborhood diner is closing. But then we have to ask ourselves, well, when was the last time that we went there and were willing to spend money there? Yeah. I do believe in and accept the fact that we live in a capitalistic, consumer-driven economy. And so what I'm doing also with the economic report that accompanies our list is trying to show that these dollars are making an impact, that we're not just doing this for idealistic or righteous or moral reasons, but there's a real economic impact to voting with our dollars.
Well, I love this, Sarah, because interestingly, I remember years ago, I remember an older lady saying to me, well, I can't believe how much you spend on food. Because when I go to the grocery store, I try to make sure that I buy as much organic, healthy food that doesn't have preservatives in it. And she said, I spend less than half, and I only spend using coupons mostly. And also, I was eating out, but making sure that, I eat out places that are, really good food. And I said, but for me, food is my health. What I put in my body, it affects my overall health. I mean, I will either eat right today so that I don't have to take 10 bottles of medication like my grandma did when she hit 60, or I can, I'd rather spend it on good food as opposed to medicine later on. Yeah.
Yep. I'm absolutely with you. I think it's that, pay now or pay later, but you or society will pay. And I think, we just, sometimes it's hard for us, I think, especially as Americans, and I think we see this in our people that are running for office often say, Americans want to just save a few cents today in their pocket versus like the longer term implications of some of our decisions. And I agree. I think that, it's if you just look at, for instance, one of the aspects of good food, which is trying to provide a livable wage for restaurant workers. If restaurant workers who are predominantly, especially when you think about the back of the house, kitchen staff, dishwashers, in this country are predominantly people from underrepresented backgrounds. And if they are not provided with a livable wage, then that means that their kids are not being provided good food, which probably means that their kids are going to have a hard time paying attention in school and learning, because who can learn if you're hungry? Who can learn if you're eating bad food? And then their economic prospects when they grow up. And so then we get into this cycle of poverty. And so I just think, if you just think about your dollars as going to help contribute to a livable wage, how many of society's ills could we try to prevent if we actually thought about the implication of our spending, and using food as just one example of that.
Yeah, it's so true. I remember a couple years ago, I think I might have mentioned this on the show before. We went to one of our favorite restaurants, and we have this wonderful waitress there. I was totally bold to find out that as a waitress or a busboy that you only make like $2 an hour, and that's like the going rate, and then they expect you to make the rest in the tips. But this particular restaurant, which I didn't know until we had a conversation, that most of the people were not tipping well. They weren't even giving 10%, sometimes nothing. And she's busting her butt. And I was sitting at a table right next to us, and this guy ordered a fish meal, a really kind of pricey fish meal. And he said, after he ate the whole bloody fish, he said it wasn't that good and he wanted his money back. And, the restaurant manager said, okay, sir. And she got 0 tip and they walked out. And I was just bawled away, and I'm thinking to myself, see, you think you got a free meal. What you did is you cost all of us, including her, more, because she gets to go home with almost no money and like you said, maybe be hungry because this, I have a couple choice words, wanted to be a jerk. But it wasn't necessary. When you think you're getting a couple dollars and, oh, look, I'm playing the system, you're not playing anyone but all of us. You're playing yourself and you're playing everyone. When we go into a restaurant, maybe you don't eat out as much, but you eat well and you eat a good restaurant and you pay them decent. Then guess what? We don't go out every weekend. Maybe we go out once a month, 6 months, but you're having an awesome meal. People are getting paid for the value that they provided, and you're not trying to stick someone for a free meal or something, or, pay minimal dollars to get that cheap meal or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like when I hear you tell a story like that, I think it's, do we want to have a me mentality or a we mentality? When you think about like that guy in the fish, he was thinking about like himself, what's in it for him? It didn't taste good to him. But if you switch your mentality and say, how is my decision going? How can I take a more we approach to this decision so that I'm not just caring about my interests, but I'm caring about, everyone else's interests, the waitress, the system as a whole. I think that we have to look beyond our own interests and understand that, we are part of society, we're part of communities, and how we spend our money it either contributes in a positive way to the communities that we live in. A community could be as large as your state or your region or your country. And so what I sometimes like to say is, in our most recent economic report, we discovered through the numbers that for every dollar a chef spends on the good food economy, that dollar at a national level is having 3 times the economic impact. So if we just take that, and it means that the 125 restaurants that were featured on our list this past year had a $255 million economic impact on the good food economy. But if we just take that down to, simple dollars that you and I have in our wallet, that means that for every dollar they spend, it's having a $3 economic impact. And I think everyone can understand $1 equals $3.
Yeah.
And I like to say to people, if you knew that every time you were spending $1, that it was having 3 times the impact, which food system do you want to contribute to? The big industrial factory food system that is only taking into account profits and efficiency, or the good food system that is trying to take into account multiple stakeholders' needs? Because I think a lot of people don't understand. It's going to sound like I'm contradicting something I said. It's not just $1. Someone might say, well, it was only $5. But if you knew that $5 was really having a $15 economic impact, which system do you want to contribute to? I think we have to start to think that way. And of course, by individuals thinking that way, hopefully we can create like a tipping point to change the system. Because I do recognize, and I don't want to sound idealistic, that the challenge in our current food system is bigger than anything that any one of us can handle or can change individually. Yeah. But I do believe that together, individual actions can create a tipping point that will force the system to change. And I say that because I just recently learned through a professor at MIT University that there's a new research study coming out that talks about the fact that it is more about the system and what the quality of the food available in the system that affects what we eat rather than individual actions, which I thought was interesting because there's this famous quote, which is, tell me what you eat and I'll tell you who you are. Yeah. Or you are what you eat.
Yes.
But what that professor went on to say was, yes, it is true that we are what we eat, but more importantly, what we eat is based on the quality of food available in our system. So if you happen to live in a food desert, it's going to be very hard for you to eat good food.
No, I totally get you. I remember many years ago, I lived in a rather poor area, and to go and get a banana, you had to go 10 blocks or more out. And I'm like, what's wrong with this picture? You can't get fresh fruits and vegetables. You have to, go out almost a mile just to get some. And this isn't in New York. So this isn't, I'm not talking that we're in the rural area where, you might have to drive 40 minutes to get to the local grocery store. I'm talking about being in the city. And so this was a rather poorish area where they didn't have fresh fruits and vegetables nearby. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? But also, Sarah, I remember hearing a guy that came on the show a couple of years ago talk about there's different countries that do a less processed, more humane way of dealing with animal treatment and killing of animals. And guess what? It turned out to be more profitable than our system. And the front end, it was less profitable until they built up their system. But actually, we assume that this is the only way that we're going to be able to feed our society and that people would just starve. And that's not true. For one, we eat way too much meat as it is, as a populace. We sit on our butts, most of us, and we're not doing heavy lifting. Do we need to eat meat 3 times a day? So, I mean,
yes, I'm guilty of that. I still eat 3 times a day.
Really? Wow. No, I don't like that much. But, Sarah, this is so important. I know that we can all make a difference individually with our pocketbooks and getting educated as consumers as well as restaurants. How can restaurants listening in get involved in your 2019 application period and be a part of learning about where their food comes from and be more conscious?
Well, one of the great things about this list is that every restaurant or food service business that's based in the United States is eligible to apply. So this is not limited to fine dining restaurants, food service operations, fast casual restaurants, casual dining restaurants, fine dining. Everyone is eligible to apply. And the 2019 application period opens in mid-January. And will be open for about 5 months through mid-May. And they can go to our website, goodfood100restaurants.org, and download the PDF of the application in mid-January to kind of see the types of questions that we're asking and start putting together the data to submit before the deadline in mid-May.
Awesome. And I know what I'm hoping this will do, our conversation here, is that get us all conscious on where we spend our money and how we eat, because this isn't just for the people who are serving us and the animals behind it and the food behind it and the farmers. It's also our health we're talking about here. Like we said earlier, you can pay now in good, healthy eating, or you can pay later in a whole bunch of medicine. And I know we'd all like a better quality of life for everyone. So thank you so much for coming to share your great wisdom today on Savvy Business Radio, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
You betcha. Now, again, let people know where they can find out and get a part of this application and get in on it again.
Sure. You can learn more about the Good Food 100 restaurants on our website, goodfood100restaurants.org. The application opens in mid-January. There's no fee to apply, and every restaurant in the U.S. is eligible to participate.
That is fabulous. Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming to Savvy Business Radio, and have a wonderful Christmas, New Year's, and happy holiday.
Thank you. You too.
Savvy Business Radio broadcasts worldwide via a large podcast network, celebrating business owners, entrepreneurs, influencers, and successful individuals. Find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest. Call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.